This is Committee on Law and Government. We have a quorum with Vice Chairman Councilman Green, Councilwoman Bass, and Council President Darrell Clark, and myself, Bill Greenlee. Ms. Marconi, will you please read the title of the first bill before us today?
Bill number 190182, an ordinance amending Title 10 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Regulation of Individual Conduct and Activity and Title 19 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Finance, Taxes, and Collection to impose liability and provide for the revocation of licenses for certain persons who permit human trafficking, involuntary servitude, or related unlawful activity to occur on a property or in connection with a business under certain terms and conditions.
Thank you. You want to call Ms. Marconi, please call the witnesses that we have on the record, please. Actually, while she's doing that, let me make just a very short statement on this bill. Obviously, human trafficking is a problem around the city. One of the things we've heard many times is that some owners, not all certainly, some owners take too much of a hear no evil, see no evil kind of approach to this. And this is what we believe is a reasonable bill that says if owners are aware of a problem, they have to take some action. It's really that simple. And I want to just recognize the efforts of Joe Rosenberger from our law department who worked on drafting this legislation. We appreciate her help on this.
Sergeant Matt White from the Philadelphia Police Department and Sarah Kaiser of License and Inspection.
Thank you. Good morning, folks.
Good morning, Chair.
Please, whoever would like to go first, please identify yourself and proceed.
Good morning, Chairperson Greenlee and other members of the Committee on Law and Government. My name is Matt White, and I'm an advisor to Police Commissioner Richard Ross. I'd like to thank the committee for allowing me the opportunity to voice the Police Department's position regarding Bill number 190182, which establishes liability on persons who knowingly permit human trafficking activities to occur on a property or business owned by such persons. At this time, on behalf of the Commissioner, I would like to specifically thank Chairman Greenlee for his leadership, passion, and commitment to confronting human trafficking in Philadelphia through the introduction of this bill. As we all know, human trafficking is both a state and federal crime. This is a crime that intentionally transcends jurisdictional boundaries with the hopes of defeating both investigators and prosecutors. The Philadelphia Police Department has been committed to combating human trafficking and will remain committed. Our Special Victims Unit, along with our state and federal law enforcement partners and victim service providers, have established a joint human trafficking task force specially designed to overcome the jurisdictional hurdles that human trafficking presents for law enforcement. In addition, this task force works to ensure that victims receive the proper services to overcome their trauma and hopefully move on to leading productive and happy lives. Law enforcement will address the offenders, but we greatly appreciate the efforts of Chairman Greenlee through the bill to give the city another tool in our toolbox to address this crime. As I previously mentioned, human traffickers intentionally use jurisdictional boundaries to their advantage and frequently move operations. They will rent hotel rooms, business suites, and other legitimate business locations to perpetrate these crimes, and the owners and managers of these businesses are very often aware of what is occurring and allow it to continue for personal financial gain. While not directly involved in human trafficking, by knowingly permitting such activities to occur in their properties, they are providing a safe haven for these predators to operate. Bill number 190182 will clearly not stop human trafficking in Philadelphia on its own, but it is a very welcome tool in our fight. For this reason, the Philadelphia Police Department fully supports the passage of Bill number 190182, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before we have questions, we'll hear from Ms. Kaiser, but let me also put on the record that committee members, Councilman Jones and Councilwoman Gim, are present. Ms. Kaiser, please.
Good morning, Chairperson Greenlee and members of the Committee on Law and Government. My name is Sarah Kaiser, and I'm the Legislative Affairs Manager for the Department of Licenses and Inspections. Today, I am here to provide testimony on Bill number 190182, which, if enacted, will amend Title 10 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Regulation of Individual Conduct and Activity. The bill would amend the code to impose liability for certain persons who permit human trafficking, involuntary servitude, or related unlawful activity to occur on a property or in connection with a business. In the event that the Department of Licenses and Inspections suspects activity associated with human trafficking We are prepared to issue violation notices and collect the fines associated with these violations. We believe that the additional authority given to the department will allow us to better hold business owners accountable for what goes on in and around their property. This in turn will create safer and more livable communities for all city residents. The department supports this bill and its proposed amendments and is prepared to enforce its provisions should it become law. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the department's testimony.
Thank you both. Before I recognize the members for questions, let me just state, I should have stated earlier, before this hearing, we have had a meeting with interested parties, the Building Management Association, the Hotel Association, and also HAPCO. We worked out some amendments to try to make it a little, just as clear as possible what our intention was here. And we will put in the record, we have letters from both BOMA and the Hotel Association in non-opposition to this bill. In fact, I think it's fair to say the Hotel Association is in support of the bill. And they worked with us on the amendments. So with that, Ms. Kaiser, let me ask you just one question on that note. You saw the bill. Do you see any, like we tried to use the word reasonable in here, do you see anything that is in any way conflicting that would cause any problems to make it clear what our intention on this bill was?
No, I don't think that there's any conflicts.
Okay. And Sergeant, I guess the same? Yeah.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing this problem to the forefront. I really appreciate it. I don't care what district you are in or whether you represent at large. It impacts almost every part of Philadelphia. I guess my question and then comment towards solution is that how could the Blue Moon Hotel in West Philadelphia exist for decades and not be shut down by L&I or law enforcement? The Blue Moon Hotel not only took over with dubious distinction that hotel, but the surrounding block. I mean, business obviously was so good they were able to penetrate an entire block, and it was known by everyone from 8 to 80, that's where that kind of activity happened. I don't understand that, and if it were just one block where prostitution, drug activity, violence occurred, that would be one thing. But if you look at the North American Motor Lodge on City Avenue, and the first clue is that they rent by the hour. that should have given us some indication that maybe, just maybe, we should have microscoped them out of the bunch. And there's Roosevelt Boulevard, I don't know what the name of that one is, but that's Ben Salem.
Lincoln Motor Line.
Yeah, I mean, so these beehives of activity are known to average citizens that they occur, but it seems as though we have for a long period of time kind of see no evil, hear no evil, do no good in these places. And so now that it's happened, tell me how we are going to, with a laser beam focus, as one of my colleagues says, curtail that activity.
Well, this bill will enable us to issue a violation when we suspect that type of activity, and along with a bill that was passed a couple years ago that allows us to regulate better these properties that are chronic nuisances. Once they get a number of violations within a certain amount of time, we'll be able to pull licenses, we'll cease operations, because they're considered a chronic nuisance. It's not something that they can fix and then go back to business. Once you have so many violations in a short period of time, we'll be able to cease operations.
So in addition, I would hope that you would consider that if a crime continues to happen at a location, that we then use that as a bellwether to say we need to focus again on the law enforcement side. So so in my district, which encompasses the Motor Lodge, if you take that one block around that facility, I'd have no crime in that area, like none. But at that location, there's always a fight. There's always an accusation of rape, and I was told often that someone did not pay the appropriate fee, so therefore they were able to charge the individual and say they attacked them. Whether that happened, I'm not in the individual cases, but if you get a pattern of that may be undercover, maybe, just somebody sitting outside could begin to curtail that kind of activity to dissuade it. You have $1 million homes within a half a block of the place. It's the one eyesore on the whole city avenue. There's another one, but it's not in my district, so it's in somebody else's township. But we need to, I don't want to call it a strike force because we have such other pressing needs, but it is the kind of activity that begets other activity. Where that happens, there's drug abuse. Where that happens, there's violence. And it just seems to me that if you nip it in the bud, if you would, we would all have a better quality of life, including the victims.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. And let me just say, obviously this bill isn't the be-all and end-all, but I think it's another, I think the sergeant used the word, in the toolbox that we can use. And I think what is important here is sometimes if, as you said, the owners oftentimes take this hear no evil, see no evil kind of approach. And if we can show that they have been notified in some ways by community complaints, by police activity, something, and they haven't taken action, maybe that the activity can be curtailed earlier than it has to go through the whole legal process. And that's one of the various things. But you're right, I think we also have to get everybody involved and keep on it,
So in my commentary, there was actually a question. How did the Blue Moon survive for decades?
I certainly can't speak to the history of the Blue Moon. What I can say about the North American Motor Lodge, which you asked about, is that it is on law enforcement's radar. I don't have an update on that location for you today, but I'm happy to look into that and provide something to council. Also, over the winter, I was on location when they issued the cease operation on the Blue Moon, and I was very proud to be out there that day with both L&I and the police departments, closing those doors and having citizens drive by and in fact honk their horns and applaud the actions of both city agencies. So things can be done.
Yes.
I'm done.
You good?
Thank you,
Okay,
Mr.
thank you. Just on the side, I must say, I know you and Councilman Green have this sartorial debate sometimes. Councilman, he's got you today, I have to say, sorry. I have to rule in his favor today. Councilman Green?
The clocks are right at least twice a day. Good morning. Just have a few questions, and when Councilmember Jones was talking about different notorious establishments, it made me think of the Hotel Carlisle in North Philadelphia. That anyone that knows North Philadelphia, especially west of Broad Street, not far from Temple University, Hotel Carlisle has been there and operating for a long time. It's been a notorious institution. You don't see people engaged in prostitution as publicly as they used to, but that was a location that you could drive by almost any time of the day, morning, noon, or evening, and you would see people engaging in solicitation of untoward behavior. But I just had a couple questions in reference to the legislation. One of the questions I had under 10-2303 regarding presumption of deliberate indifference. And in that section, under section 1, it makes reference to, and this is actually probably for both Sergeant White and Ms. Kaiser. My concern and question is that the legislation under this section states, or any arrests, any of which relate to alleged human trafficking activity. Having been a former prosecutor, there is a section in the Crimes Code that's often used when you cannot necessarily have clear evidence that prostitution has occurred, but obstruction of the highway, which I'm sure Sergeant White's familiar with, when someone's been charged with obstruction of the highway, where an officer has come onto a scene and it appears that people have been engaging in prostitution but cannot fully get that perspective, so someone may be charged with obstruction of the highway. So my question, is that a type of offense which may relate to alleged human trafficking activity? And I'm trying to get a sense, what are some of the offenses that would be connected to alleged human trafficking activity? I raise that question because I think we need to be as broad as possible, and as just a concern, I'm just curious from your perspective.
Thank you, Councilman. I think there are several statutes which are laid out in the definition section related to crimes involving human trafficking under the Crimes Code. I'm certainly happy to look into any avenue that we can pursue. However, I think at this time obstructing the highways falls under a limited class of offenses that we currently issue code violation notices for, so I'm not sure how that would apply in this situation, but I am.
Matt, could you talk a little bit more in the microphone? I missed a few words.
I apologize.
No.
Well, I guess the reason I'm raising that, because that could be an example of alleged human trafficking activity, where if there's some type of notice that people are seeing people who are being forced to do certain activities, however, you don't have a full observation, but you can at least cite them for obstruction of the highway. I'm just curious if that was something that could possibly be considered as relate to alleged human trafficking activity.
So I cannot say for certain at this time whether that would be related to human trafficking. However, I am happy to look into it with our partners in the law department and to inquire about that as a possible avenue.
Okay. Just another follow-up in reference to my understanding the definition of deliberate indifference would lead a reasonable person to question whether human activity or any other related unlawful activity was occurring. And you made reference to, I think in your beginning statement, that where property owners have been aware or know that activities had been occurring, would they meet that reasonable person standard? I'm just concerned. I want to make sure that we're able to really force, put those on notice, and also make sure property owners are engaged or really not doing the steps that they need to take. Whether that standard is the best standard or needs to be a clear and convincing standard, I just want to make sure that we have a standard that works and that doesn't give someone an out. So I'm curious in reference to versus a reasonable person standard versus a clear and convincing standard. What standard is the best?
I think as far as L&I's involvement, our inspectors would be issuing violations based on reported occurrences and any suspicion that they may have. And then if that were to be appealed, that would be the board's determination to really determine deliberate indifference. Our inspectors aren't really qualified to make those determinations.
Mm-hmm. So in looking at the amendment to section 10-2303(1), I see there was some amendments where it's basically if a person on notice for the purpose of this chapter, when a person becomes aware of a written or oral complaint of a written oral complaint. So if a tenant makes a complaint, other people make a complaint to the property manager, others, that would be, from your understanding, the standard that would need to be made for a reasonable person standard.
Yes.
Okay. 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 Thank you.
Ms. Rosenberger, who helped draft this, maybe she can address that issue too. She's from the law department. Mm-hmm. Joe, you want to just identify yourself and if you have any statement on that?
Sure. Good afternoon, Chairperson Greenlee and the committee. My name is Joe Rosenberger Altman. I'm with the Law Department. I just wanted to answer the two questions that Councilperson Green asked momentarily ago. One was about a violation of obstructing the highway. And I think that obviously every situation is an individual situation, it would need to be evaluated on an individual basis. I agree with Mr. White that the offense itself would likely not be sufficient to put someone on notice, but presumably there have been other complaints regarding the specific activity at issue, and that presumably would be sufficient to put the person on notice. So while it is an individual assessment that would need to be conducted, that's how we would likely look at the situation. With respect to your question about deliberate indifference, clear and convincing evidence as a general matter is a higher standard. This requires not only that a reasonable person would know that human trafficking is occurring, but that if it would put them on notice to question it, it gives them the requirement that they do so. So it is a lower standard than the alternative that you suggested.
Right. And I'm just looking at the amendments where you make reference to when a person becomes aware of a written or oral complaint, and from your perspective, that's enough to meet the standard.
I'm sorry, could you?
Looking at the section where there was an amendment, says when a person becomes aware of a written or oral complaint, that's enough to satisfy the standard of a reasonable person standard.
Yes, in fact, here the way it's written, that would be sufficient to establish a presumption that the person has been deliberately indifferent, and the individual that is subject to that presumption would then have to rebut that presumption with clear and convincing evidence, which is a higher standard.
Yeah, I just want to, because I do see some amendments in the legislation, and I just wanted to make sure that we are making all steps that we can to make sure that those property owners that should have taken action are taking action, and they're not able to use creative legal techniques that people that, members of a certain profession can use. Not that I know anything.
No, not that you would. No, I understand that, sir.
But no, thank you.
And just, Councilman, when we made that change, it was, as you see, we crossed that when among other things because there was some concern that was a little
too vague.
Too vague, so.
Right, that's why I said when a written or oral complaint. Right.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Thank you. May you just stay there in case there are no questions. Councilwoman Bass?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to say a couple of things. And first of all, I wanted to just hone in on something my colleague, Councilman Jones, mentioned earlier, in which he asked how could it be that these types of establishments operated for so long and everyone knew that they were there. Certainly as a lifelong Philadelphian, you know the spots in the neighborhood. Everybody knew. And I'm really glad that we're beginning to, stop normalizing behavior that is unnatural here in the city of Philadelphia. And I think that this is a piece of legislation that's really going to go a long way towards that. So I really wanted to thank the chairman, the sponsor of this bill, because this is very important work that's going to be done, and particularly around protecting the lives of primarily women who, fall victim to sex trafficking. So I really just wanted to say that. And also I wanted to mention there was the case, and I'm not sure if this was your inspiration, so to speak, in terms of bringing this bill forward, which was some of the hotels that were on the boulevard. Mm-hmm. And there was a case in which one of the operators of the hotel or motel mentioned that they had seen a young woman, very young woman, who was scantily clad, who was clearly, had been high and kept high for a large period of time so that she could, have these people come in and out of her room. And the hotel operators felt like, well, it was none of my business. Mm-hmm. It didn't have anything to do with me. And so that kind of attitude is absolutely unacceptable. And again, I just really want to thank the chairman for bringing this forward. We just can't be a city where we mind our own business and expect that things are going to get better. We can't come home at the end of the day and go in our houses and close our doors and think that, somebody else is going to fix it. So I just really wanted to say thanks for all of your hard work, for bringing this forward, and thank you to the chairman for making it happen, because this is a really serious issue, and I sometimes feel that because they're women, often they're women of color, we don't take it seriously, and this is something to be taken very, very seriously. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilwoman. And I think there's a lot of examples, and that one you used is one of those. And I know Councilman O'Neill, is hoping to get here. and he had mentioned incidents up in that far northeast area and there's also been places in Center City, so it's been all over the place. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none? Thank you all very much. Thank you for all the work you've done on this. Is there anyone else here to testify on bill number 190182? No? Okay. Thank you. And there will be amendments offered at the meeting to that bill. And let me just also state our Majority Leader, Councilman Heenan, is also present at the hearing. Ms. Marconi, our next bill and resolution, please.
Bill number 190290, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified electors of the City of Philadelphia of an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter to revise city procurement procedures as approved by resolution of the City Council, fixing the date of a special election for such purpose, prescribing the form of a ballot question to be voted on, and authorizing the appropriate officers to publish notice and to make arrangements for the special election. And Resolution 190299, resolution proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter to revise city procurement procedures.
Thank you. Before we have our witnesses, recognize the sponsor, Councilman Green. And also, I'm sorry, for the record, Councilman O'Neill, member of the committee, also present. Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to thank members of the administration for their work on this piece of legislation, working along with my office. Christine Dederick Lopez, the Chief Administrative Officer, Iola Harper, other members of the administration for helping us work on this legislation, which is another attempt to address poverty in our city, especially to help small business owners do more business with the City of Philadelphia. Since I've come into this chamber, many of the pieces of legislation I've worked on have focused on how to make it easier for small businesses to do business with the City of Philadelphia. I believe this legislation is another step in that regard by changing the threshold for RFPs. From my experience of being very active in the National League of Cities, the large city council, as well as being a second vice president for the Pennsylvania Municipal League, most cities around the country do not have the same threshold that we have for requests for proposals, which is a very low threshold at $34,000. Much have it at a much higher threshold, which is what this proposed legislation aims to do. Hopefully we'll be able to pass this legislation out of committee, then pass it through City Council, and then bring it to the voters in the fall, so we can take another step to enable more small businesses in the City of Philadelphia to do business with the city and help us to grow out of poverty. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you for work on this. Ms. Marconi, you want to call, yes, we have 3 witnesses on record. Why don't you call all their names? And
Christine Dederick Lopez, Iola Harper, and Tiffany Rolfing.
Good morning. Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Whoever would like to go first, please identify yourself and proceed. And the record will reflect Councilman O, member of the committee, is also present. Okay.
Good morning, council members.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairperson Greenlee and members of the Law and Government Committee. My name is Christine Dederick Lopez, and I am the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Philadelphia. I am here today to testify in support of Bill number 190290, as well as the accompanying resolution, which would amend the city's home rule charter to increase the maximum dollar amount for when a formal bid or RFP is required from $34,000 to $100,000 if contracting with a local business, and from $34,000 to $75,000 for all businesses. The county administration supports the efforts of the bill's sponsor, Councilmember Green, to increase access to city contracts for local businesses by removing barriers and simplifying the contracting process. While the City of Philadelphia gives preference to local businesses when awarding contracts, the process can often be difficult and time-intensive for those businesses to navigate. And because the city maintains a relatively low contract threshold, $34,000, for when a formal bid or RFP is required, especially in comparison to our peer cities, many businesses, particularly disadvantaged businesses, are deterred from accessing opportunities that require a formal bid or RFP over the current $34,000 threshold. The city's contract execution process takes on average over 100 days for contracts valued between $34,000 and $100,000. With the enactment of this bill, the administration's goal is to decrease this time to between 35 and 40 days. Getting contracts executed faster means vendors can begin to invoice and be paid that much quicker for their work. The change will also incentivize city departments to work directly with local businesses by simplifying the contracting process, as well as reducing contractor paperwork and proposal burden for contracts up to $100,000. Further, under the city's current contracting thresholds, executing these small but formal contracts represents significant staff time, given that they make up 62% of the total number of contracts executed by the city annually. Raising the contracting threshold will save city staff time and allow them to focus their energy on larger, more complex procurements. Since the introduction of Bill number 190290, the CAO's office began considering what would be included in companion regulations. Some of the areas being considered include public notification of the contract opportunities covered by this program, centralizing these public notices onto one city website, mandating the solicitation of local minority, women, and disabled-owned businesses, and establishing annual reporting requirements to assess local and diverse participation on these contracts, among other things. Should the charter change be enacted, the administration will also expand its outreach to local businesses to increase the number of local business entities registered with the city. Most significantly, though, through this bill, the city will be reinvesting a portion of its spending back into the local economy, which is the right thing to do. According to a study provided by the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia Anchors for Growth and Equity, or PAGE initiative, every $1 million spent by anchor institutions with local vendors actually represents $1.5 million in expenditures within Philadelphia and supports 10 additional local jobs. The City of Philadelphia is a nearly $5 billion economic engine in the region. Close to $15 million is spent on contracts of $100,000 or less, which are often entry points for small local businesses to gain experience working with the city. Considering the PAGE multiplier I just described, even if the city were to award a portion of that $15 million to Philadelphia businesses, the economic benefit to the local economy would be significant. The administration looks forward to supporting Councilman Green in implementation of Bill number 190290. The proposed charter change will further modernize city contracting processes to take into account the local business community and the current marketplace. This concludes my testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you. We'll hear from all three before we have questions. Ms. Harper, please.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Iola Harper, and I'm the Deputy Commerce Director for the Office of Economic Opportunity. I'm here to testify in support of Councilman Green's charter change regarding limits and requirements for lower tiers of departmental purchasing. OEO supports this change to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter. By streamlining the process for lower levels of purchasing, more small and local businesses will have the opportunity to contract with the city. The contracting process will become more efficient, which benefits both departments and the firms with whom they do business. This change makes very clear the procedures for purchasing on contracts of $100,000 or less, and at each tier maximizes the opportunity for small local firms. It gives the departments the discretion to make best purchasing decisions, considering the administrative burdens on both city and businesses, while also emphasizing economic opportunities for a diverse array of firms in Philadelphia. Lower value contracts should provide chances for smaller and more diverse firms to do business with the city. However, in the last 4 fiscal years, minority and women-owned businesses' participation fell in the lowest tiers of contracting categories for small order purchases and miscellaneous purchase orders. It has never exceeded 25%. This is well below the city's 35% goal over that time. It is important that as much as Councilman Green's charter change encourages participation of small and local firms, it also makes it clear to the departments that minority and women participation is always a priority. The regulations being contemplated for each tier of spending in this regulation either require or recommend that the department solicit MWBE firms. This is a prime opportunity to increase participation in this area, and we want to ensure that that happens. MWBE firms are disproportionately small, and this sort of contracting should provide them with the chance to gain experience and relationships needed to grow into larger contracts to conduct more business with the city. Under this change, departments should continue to use OEO as a resource to increase diverse participation on all levels of contracting. Our office is ready to work with departments and City Council to make sure that this change to the Home Rule Charter not only increases opportunities for small local firms and efficiency for departments, but also helps to increase the city's diverse contract diverse contract and provide inroads to small MWBEs. We will also work with our suppliers to ensure that those who can apply to become local business entity, who can apply to become a local business entity does so. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you. Please, ma'am. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Chair Greenlee, Vice Chair Green, and members of the committee, thank you for having me here today to speak on support of Bill 190-290. I strongly support this legislation and applaud it as demonstration of the city's commitment to growing small, locally owned businesses in Philadelphia. I am Tiffany Rolfing, principal owner of Idea Broker and elected member of the board of directors of the Sustainable Business Network of Greater Philadelphia. Idea Broker is a local and certified women-owned business enterprise who demonstrates the values of the triple bottom line. We work hard to develop and build communities and sustainable economies. Examples of this commitment include working with Philadelphia Energy Authority and local utilities on upgrading small businesses' energy efficiency, building to a higher energy efficient standard, and providing community engagement and outreach for socially impactful projects. We've gone through numerous procurement bids and have found the process to be time-consuming and lacking in transparency. In the last year, I've submitted 6 proposals amounting to approximately $1.2 million in contract revenue. These submissions were for both sub and prime contracts. Between submission and award, it took 3 to 5 months on average to award the contract. 3 contracts were through rebuild consultant RFPs. One was for the Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. One was to the Philadelphia Water Department, and the other was submitted to the Planning and Development Department. I received none of these contracts, and despite repeated attempts, I was rarely offered any feedback from the procurement officer about my applications in order to improve future bid proposals. In some of these cases, I was never even notified who ultimately received the contract. These RFPs take anywhere from 2 weeks to a month to prepare and coordinate all stakeholders. I estimate that I have spent about 250 hours in the last year on these 6 proposals, and based on my market hourly rate, that means I've lost around $49,500 on developing proposals in the last year. Even when using a lower government nonprofit hourly rate, for my time, I've lost over $25,000 in revenue. Developing proposals and bidding on contracts is part of the nature of my business. However, the city's contract process is cumbersome, duplicative, and incredibly frustrating for small business owners. The city has said many times that they want to contract with businesses like mine, but the process as it stands is prohibitive. As a values-based, certified women-owned and local business, I bring significant benefits to each contract opportunity that larger, non-Philly-based businesses do not. By raising the RFP threshold, this initiative would do a lot to remove the barriers businesses like mine have faced in the RFP process. Additionally, the focus on direct outreach to certified women and minority-owned businesses would make me significantly more likely to want to participate in the contract process again. With my experience with the city contracting process over the last year, I see no incentive to continue applying for city contracts unless there is a significant change. The updates proposed in this legislation show me that the city sees the value in supporting local businesses and wants to make changes that support businesses like mine to be part of a vibrant local economy. I urge you to support this legislation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much. Before I recognize Councilman Green, just want to put on the record, we also have a letter of support from the Sustainable Business Network of Greater Philadelphia on this bill and resolution. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here this morning and testifying. I just have a few questions for each of you. Ms. Denerick Lopez, you made reference in your testimony on page 1, I believe, 3rd paragraph, that with the enactment of this bill, the administration's goal is to decrease the time between 35 to 40 days for the execution process. Can you give some more context of how this legislation will help in that regard?
Sure. Right now, there is a very, right now for an RFP, it is a 17-step process. Not to get in the weeds, but that is the process. What we're looking to do for the smaller contracts is to apply an expedited process, which we have reduced to 8 steps, and we've worked with our stakeholders throughout the entire government, the law department, the finance department, risk management, in order to do that. It's essentially been built in our system that we use, so that's why we think we're able to do it within 35 and 40 days.
Also, on page two of your testimony, you talked about close to $15 million is spent on contracts of $100,000 or less. What are the nature of those type of contracts?
Hold on one second. Let me read. Hold on give me 1 minute. Those types of contracts, a lot of them are professional services consulting, but we also have some procurement contracts. I just have to look at my sheet of paper here if I could find it. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, there. So we're looking at things such as court reporting services. We have some small computer systems maintenance, childcare supplies. There's leadership training. A lot of organizations use a lot of city departments use under $100,000 for that. Some sustainability consultant. Perhaps some research and analysis or some financial analysis. So we see a lot of opportunities in this space. We also look at it as an entry point for MWDSB firms. And then, our goal is to incentivize departments to go with $100,000 so we can reinvest our local tax dollars into our local business community.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Harper, you made reference in your testimony that for small order purchases and miscellaneous purchase orders, the city's MWBE goals have never reached 35. Well, for small order purchases and miscellaneous purchase orders, we've historically been at 25% and have never met the city's 35% goal. How do you think this legislation will help in that regard?
These small contracts are the sweet spot for my vendors. And so because they're smaller dollar amounts, it gives them an opportunity to, as Christine said, to get their foot in the door and then hopefully build their way up to larger contracts. So I anticipate that there will be more small contractors that are interested in, as this young lady said, beginning to contract with the government now that there's a process in place to actually engage them and retain them.
Okay. And that leads me to my last question, Ms. Rolfing. Good to see you again. And you made reference to, I think, a very important part in your testimony, especially the last paragraph of page 1, when you talk about the amount of hours spent in completing RFPs. As a former small business owner and in a previous life an attorney representing small businesses, I know the amount of time it takes to complete an RFP process, and by you kind of breaking down the cost, not even at your normally hourly rate, but also at the lower government rate, that's still a significant loss of revenue. And you made reference to the fact that because of that, and also not getting follow-up from the city on how you did, how that discourages you from applying for other RFPs with the city. Can you expand on that, and do you think other businesses have the same perspective?
Yes. Yes. So, yeah, it was a significant amount of time, and a lot of it is coordinating with whether it's a prime or as me sitting as the sub too, and making sure that all of that is compiled into one RFP to submit. And so reducing the time, that would be a significant saver on my small business. And the amount of the amount of dollars that I am, I wouldn't say wasting, because it is very much a part of my job to submit proposals. So I believe in that process, that you should be qualified first. But I do believe that this would help in, getting more transparency and having that help with getting my foot in the door and working with the city more.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just close with a comment. I think one of the challenges we've had historically in the city is that by having the same contractors bid over and over again, because they're able to get to work, and other businesses like yours, Ms. Rolfing, and others that Ms. Harper and Ms. Denrick Lopez spoke about, decide not to compete and not to apply for these RFPs because of the exorbitant amount of time it takes to complete the work, and also feeling they're not going to get the work. And then to close, what it does not allow us to invest in our city. I mean, the dollars that we are using to procure goods and services come from taxpayers like Ms. Rolfing and like all of us in the city of Philadelphia. And so we should be using the tax dollars that business owners and individuals provide to reinvest in our city, especially our small businesses, if we're going to move beyond this 26% poverty rate that we have in the city of Philadelphia. So it's good to hear that the administration is taking that perspective. Historically, I don't think the city has taken that perspective, that procurement is not just about buying the best and cheapest widgets and services, but at the same point, it's using the dollars that we have in the city of Philadelphia to buy the best quality goods and services that we can, but at the same point, use those dollars to reinvest into our city, because it is the individuals and the business owners of the city of Philadelphia that provide us with the resources to do the procurement that we need. So thank you all for your testimony this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you all very much. Thank you. Is there anyone else here to testify on Bill number 190290 or Resolution 190299? Seeing none, we'll complete our long government hearing, and we'll momentarily go into the public meeting. All right, we are now in the public meeting of the Committee on Law and Government, and the chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that Bill number 190182 be amended. The amendment has been circulated to all members of the committee.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the amendment's approved. Councilman Green?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that resolution number 190299 be amended and resolution be circulated to all members of the committee.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the amendment to the resolution is approved. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that bill number 190182 as amended be voted out of this committee with a favorable recommendation, and that this bill be heard at the next session of council.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, bill number 190182 as amended is reported out of this committee favorably with a rule suspension. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that bill number 190290 be voted out of this committee with a favorable recommendation, and the rules of council be suspended so this bill can be heard at our next session of council.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, bill number 190290 reported out of this committee favorably with a rule suspension. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that resolution number 190299 as amended be voted out of this committee with a favorable recommendation, and the rules. That's right, it's a resolution. And that the and be voted out of this committee with a favorable recommendation.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, resolution 190299 as amended is reported out of this committee with a favorable recommendation. That concludes the business of the Committee on Law and Government. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you, guys.